Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see everyone here on such an auspicious holiday weekend. My name is Anya Kreitney. I'm the programs manager at the Poetry and Literature Center, housed right here in the Library of Congress. The Poetry and Literature Center is many things. In fact, we're the home of the U.S. Poet Laureate, who you may have even heard of, Miss Tracy K. Smith. But we're also a center devoted to programming that engages and promotes the intrinsic value of literary arts. We're a place that believes the imagination is one of our most transformative powers, building the way for true and lasting enrichment. So it's no surprise we're elated to celebrate today's panelists, Bill Jones, Bess Quinlan, Dave Richmond, and Bruce Weigel. And we have another last-minute attendee who will, a special guest shortly thereafter. All poets who prove what's possible under poetry's big tent. Today, each poet will share poems from their favorite World War I writers, as well as their own work. Afterward, we'll have a short discussion about the way poetry not only relates to military experience, but enacts a full range of creative expression. As you may have gathered by now throughout the course of the day, this event is being held in tandem with the library's new and major exhibition titled Echoes of the Great War, American Experiences of World War I. Last April, April 6th to be exact, marked the 100th anniversary of the United States' entry into the war, and this exhibit tells the story through correspondence, music, film, recorded sound, diaries, posters, photographs, scrapbooks, and so much more. If you haven't seen the exhibit, you'll certainly want to spend some time examining the library's treasures. But of course, don't rush out just yet. We've assembled this talented group here today as yet another way to honor the World War I centennial and of course to celebrate Veterans Day. So just so you have a sense of how the program will run, up first will be Bruce, followed by the Cowboy Poets, and each poet will read for approximately 9 to 10 minutes, followed by a short discussion and an audience Q&A. I know our panelists want to hear from you, so please be thinking of your questions, and do wait for, I'm told this has to do with the wind, so if this happens throughout the program, it's not a jackhammer, it's wind. At any rate, I know our panelists want to hear from you, so as the event goes on, please be thinking of your questions, and do wait for someone to bring you a microphone so your question can be captured for the video, okay? So with this all in mind, let me dispense with the formalities and get to our bios here, and then we'll bring on the poetry, okay? Bess Quinlan began writing after contracting polio in 1951. His grandma brought him shoeboxes of J.R. Williams cartoons and cowboy poems cut from years of livestock papers. Bess survived, one leg shorter than the other, but never recovered from the effect of those poems, cartoons, and stories. The fourth generation to raise livestock and feed, Bess became a working partner on a rundown outfit in Colorado's San Luis Valley, where he raised alfalfa, cattle, kids, dogs, and sheep. He is an American cowboy poet, widely considered to be one of the most respected poets of his genre. In fact, Bess attended the first cowboy gathering of cowboy poets in 1985, known then as the Elko Gathering, and continues to perform statewide. His writing is based on his real-life experiences as a rancher, which gives his poetry a lifelike feel. His work has been published in numerous books, magazines, as well as online poetry publications. Bill Jones served with the 3rd Marine Division as an artillery forward observer in Vietnam. He went to boot camp at Parris Island and infantry training at Camp Lejeune. Quote, "I ended up with a 105 howitzer battery in Vietnam," Jones said. Quote, "I had it better in Nam than some, worse than the majority. One 10-day operation, I saw more combat than any time else. I remember praying to live one more day because it would have been ridiculous a request, even of God, to ask for a week." End quote. Since returning from Vietnam, Bill Jones received a master's degree in psychology and has held a variety of jobs, including railroad detective, which I want to know more about. He lives in Lander, Wyoming, and his business card reads, "Bill Jones, Cowboy Poet." Dave Richmond came from a military family but had no desire to pursue the military path. At 22, he was drafted to the U.S. Army, where he served with the 2nd Indian Head Division in Korea. While performing a number of different tasks during rotation, he enjoyed learning the Korean language, which enabled him as a squad leader to communicate directly with locals. He later served as a mortar instructor. Upon returning from his deployment, Dave attended graduate school under the GI Bill, where he earned a law degree and became a deputy district attorney. He was later appointed to a municipal county position as assistant presiding judge for the Superior Court of Amador County in California. He has been a frequent visitor of the Cowboy Poetry events. Bruce Weigel is the author of more than a dozen books of poetry, including The Abundance of Nothing, which was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, The Unraveling Strangeness, Archaeology of the Circle, New and Selected Poems, and Song of Napalm, also nominated for a Pulitzer. Bruce served in the Army during the Vietnam War and was subsequently awarded the Bronze Star. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our distinguished panel. Bruce is going to kick it off. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Can you hear me? It's an honor to be here, and especially to share the podium with such distinguished guests. 4 days ago was the 100th anniversary of Wilfred Owen's death. And, you know, that's significant because he died on November 4th, and the armistice was signed on the 11th. The news just reached his parents as the bells all over England were ringing, celebrating the end of the war. Wilfred Owen was only 25 years old when he died. From a literary point of view, I think of him a lot like John Keats, who wrote most of his great poems that helped shape English literature for 250 years, died when he was 26. It's difficult for me as someone who's been a writer and a teacher writing for over 30 years to know exactly where these poems come from, the depth of them, the depth of feeling, the remarkable insights about the tiniest details usually don't come to writers until they're in their 30s or 40s. It takes a long time to learn that. And so here's someone in his 20s writing, sometimes literally in the trenches. It's almost a cliche to talk about Owens that way, but it's true. So I'm going to read my favorite poem of Owens. It's called Dulce et decorum est, which is a partial quote from a Horace poem. And I don't think it needs any introduction. Bent doubled like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and toward our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the boots of tired, outstripped 5.9s that dropped behind. That's artillery. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. You know, like a 25-year-old doesn't say an ecstasy of fumbling. This is a remarkable image there. An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime, dim through the misty panes and thick green glass as under a green sea I saw him drowning. So the green is the gas mask. He's looking through the green glass of the gas mask. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. As if in some smothering dream, you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil's sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cut of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. When I first started trying to think of myself as a poet, I read the World War I poets. There wasn't a lot of World War II poetry. There's some great World War II poetry, but not a lot of it. And that's another discussion. But the World War I poets, they sang to me as a Vietnam veteran. They sang to me in a very personal way for some reason. The kind of battles that they're describing, the kind of warfare that they're describing, rung a lot of bells. So I really got next to that whole handful of poets. And also I wanted to say that if you look at the body of work that came out of really just a half a dozen poets, they are among the very best poems in our English language. So this business about veteran poetry and soldier poetry that's one thing, but it's a way to marginalize as well. And these poems are a part. You know, when Yeats put together his Oxford anthology, he didn't include any Wilfred Owen poems. And he said in response to why he didn't, he said, there are pitiful poems about a pitiful war. He's sort of paraphrasing something that Owens had written in a letter and said, Owens wrote, the poetry is in the pity. And that's a very different idea than what Yeats had. The poetry is in the pity. So I got stuck on the idea for a long time as a writer myself, began to understand, began to really feel just what that meant. Usually we would say the pity is something that we don't want in the poem, that we want to avoid that. That's too easy. But these people showed a way to isolate those moments and to bring that idea. You know, I have one of these books where when I close it, the poems move around inside. Do you have those kind? So I can't find it. I'm going to read a poem of mine that I wrote a long time ago. It's called Song of Napalm. Everyone here knows what napalm is, right? It's a gelatin form of petroleum. So imagine jelly that burns. So when it's dropped, it sticks on whatever it's dropped on and burns. So I wanted to write a poem about napalm because Michael Herr in his great memoir said that the quintessential sound of the war was the whop, 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 whop of helicopters, which I think he's right about. I try to think about what the quintessential smell was. What is the smell? I remember these powerful smells, and there's no smell to me that's as powerful as napalm. Just imagine gasoline burning, but then add a human body to it, and it becomes an entirely different matter. So the reason I wanted to write a poem about napalm was because I thought that people really didn't know what was going on, that people didn't really understand that we were using these kinds of weapons on our fellow human beings. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't find a way to make the horror of it clear to non-combatants. As a gift, a friend of mine sent me a framed copy of a very famous Newsweek magazine that has a little Vietnamese girl running from her village, which has just been bombed. Her name is Kim Phuc, and she did survive. And that cover, I think, changed a lot of minds in America about the war. Her little brother is running behind her. He lost an eye. So I was working on the napalm poem, and the magazine was on my desk. And then suddenly I realized if I could bring her into the poem, then people would see what I'm talking about. So that's what I tried to do. I probably should have never said any of that, because now, if it fails, then Song of Napalm. After the rain, after the storm, after the rain stopped pounding, we stood in the doorway watching horses walk off lazily across the pasture's hill. We stared through the black screen, our vision altered by the distance, so I thought I saw a mist kicked up around their hooves when they faded like cutout horses away from us. Grass was never more blue in that light, more scarlet. Beyond the pasture, trees scraped their voices into the wind. Branches crisscrossed the sky like barbed wire, but you said they were only branches. Okay, the storm stopped pounding. I'm trying to say this straight. For once, I was sane enough to pause and breathe outside my wild plans, and after the hard rain, I turned my back on the old curses. I believed they swung finally away from me. But still, the branches are wire, and thunder is the pounding mortar. Still, I close my eyes and see the girl running from her village, napalm stuck to her dress like jelly, her hands reaching for the no one who waits in waves of heat before her. So I can keep on living, so I can stay here beside you. I try to imagine she runs down the road and wings beat inside her until she rises above the stinking jungle and her pain eases and your pain, mine. But the lie swings back again. The lie works only as long as it takes to speak, and the girl runs only as far as the napalm allows until her burning tendons and crackling muscles draw her up into that final position burning bodies so perfectly assume. Nothing can change that. She is burned behind my eyes, and not your good love, and not the rain-swept air, and not the jungle green pasture unfolding before us can deny it. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. You know, today is the Marine Corps birthday. Do you have any Marines in the audience? I know my friend Harvey. Happy birthday. Semper Fi, sir. My friend Patrick Sullivan here was a Navy pilot during the Vietnam War in the Navy, and of course the Marines come under the Department of the Navy. We're the men's department. And just kidding, Pat. But it's a pleasure to be here, and it's been a really great trip. I picked a poem out I'm going to do by E.E. Cummings. He's an American poet, and he's a poet that writes in small case and doesn't use any punctuation, so that kind of appeals to me. And he was an ambulance driver in First World War, and he got in a little trouble and sent home because he made the statement that I'm having trouble hating these Germans, and some people thought that was treasonous, and he was a civilian ambulance driver, and they sent him back to the United States where he got drafted. So I guess, I don't know what you'd call that, karma or something. But anyway, this poem by E.E. Cummings is called My Sweet Old Etc. And I picked this out because it's almost a cowboy poem. Almost. You'll see what I mean a little later. My sweet old etc. Aunt Lucy, during the recent war, could, and what is more, did tell you just what everybody was fighting for. My sister Isabel created hundreds and hundreds of socks, not to mention shirts, flea-proof ear warmers, etc., wristers, etc. My mother hoped that I would die, etc., bravely, of course. My father used to become hoarse, talking about how it was a privilege, and if only he could. Meanwhile, myself, etc., lay quietly in the deep mud, etc., dreaming, etc., of your smile, your eyes, your knees, and of your etc. Some of you have a dirty mind, I can see that already. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about cowboy poetry. A lot of folks have never heard cowboy poetry. It's a big thing out west, but not many people have heard of it back here. But Baxter Black, one of the well-known cowboy poet, said that cowboy poetry is somewhere between good taste and throwing up in your hat. Others have said that cowboy poetry is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms, kind of like military intelligence or rap music or postal service, or my all-time favorite oxymoron, mobile home estates. Anyway, my first exposure to cowboy poetry, I was a police detective for almost 20 years at one of these cities back east here. I forget which one it was now. They're all the same. And I got busted up and forced to retire. And I've always loved the cowboy thing, the mystique and the mystery and the myth of the American cowboy. I liked everything about it, the horses, the spurs, everything. So when I got healed up, I packed up the family and I moved to Wyoming. And the first job I got was a cook on a wagon train. And we took people on 3 and 4 day wagon trips on the original Oregon Trail in period wagons. And it was a neat deal, really. It was just like it was 1843, except we had ice and Coors Light. Other than that, everything was the same. So one night there at the Oregon Trail, a doctor friend of mine, a cowboy doctor friend of mine, rode his horse out in the middle of nowhere, 10, 12 miles out in the middle of nowhere. And he spent the night, and around the fire that night, he recited some poetry. And I still remember to this day which poem he recited. It was Gruce Kiskadden's When They Finish Shipping Cattle in the Fall. It starts out, well, you're not exactly blue, but you don't feel like you used to do. In the summer are the long, hot summer days, because your feelings and the weather seem to go together, and you're quiet in the dreamy autumn haze. And it goes on from there, a long, melancholic poem about a guy's reflecting on his life in a saddle. And as he was reading this poem, I looked around the fire there, and we had some guys that handled the mules, hard-living, hard-drinking guys. And as this poem was being recited, I looked at them. At least 2 of them had tears big as horse turds rolling down their cheeks. And I'm thinking, this is some powerful stuff. And I'd like to get be part of this. So I wrote my first poem called The Cook's Revenge, and I sent it to Western Horseman magazine, and they published it, the first poem I ever wrote. And I thought, this is great, a new career, I'm going to make a fortune now. And what I did, I was too dumb to realize this almost never happens. They get your first poem published. So I'll do the poem for you. Cooking ain't no easy thing, if anyone should ask, and cooking for a cowboy crew's a downright thankless task. The grub is cold, the boys will say, or else there's too much salt. Any blame to pass around, you can bet it's all my fault. Well, the eggs get broke, the biscuits burn, the griddle won't get hot. Try baking apple pie sometime when apples you ain't got. One time I fixed some French cuisine, served fancy wine and such. The boys all moaned and held their guts. They didn't like it much. The boss, he held us 10 plate high, like he'd fished it from a sewer, and the boys described my gourmet meal with a word that means manure. They hurt my pride, them cowboys did. I almost walked away, but then again, revenge is sweet. There'd be another day. The answer finally came to me in the middle of a drunk I'd make them ignorant cowboys pay, I'd feed them boys a skunk. So I found an old dead polecat laying in the road, biled him up one afternoon, threw in a horny toad. That night I piled their 10 plates high, but much to my surprise, them dead-burned heathens ate it all. I couldn't believe my eyes. I started once to tell them that the whole thing was a joke, but by now they'd burped contentedly and reared back for a smoke. Cookie, they said gleefully, you finally learned to cook. Can we have the recipe? Did you get it from a book? Well, those cowboys had no idea, and they ain't found out yet that they was feasting on some critters that ought not to be et. Yeah, cooking is a real tough job. It ain't no easy life, and well, if my food you just can't eat, be glad I ain't your wife. So anyway, that's kind of what a cowboy poet is. But anyway, cowboy poetry, it's taken it 150 years to become an overnight success. And the recent resurgence in cowboy poetry, like Tanya said, happened in 1985 in Elko, Nevada, when Waddy Mitchell, a Nevada buckaroo, and Hal Cannon, a folklorist, set up a bunch of folding chairs and invited some local cowboys and ranchers to come and share poems and stories. And they were scared to death that nobody was going to come. Well, they did come, and they've been coming ever since by the thousands. I mean, the whole town for a week turns into cowboy music and poetry and one thing. I didn't get there till the number 3 Cowboy Poetry Festival, a gathering it's called. And trying to think where I'm trying to go with this thing here. Anyway, it's just a wonderful thing. People describe it as kind of a big family reunion, except that people like one another. So, and that's probably it. I look forward to going every year, and I've made some wonderful friends there. In fact, on the board of trustees is my friend Pat Sullivan and Dave Richmond and Bess Quinlan, my long-term friend, and I'm going to have to start treating them all with a little more respect. Because, you know, I knew them all when they were nothing, absolutely nothing. So anyway, about 1989, we tried some war poetry. I think the first time Bess was in Durango, Colorado, wasn't it? Me and my late friend Rod McQuarrie, who was a wonderful cowboy poet, wrote classic cowboy poetry. It'll be around as long as there's sagebrush on the plains. And he left us far too early. But we got together, and about 1990 we published a book of he was another Marine Vietnam veteran, and we published some poems, and it was published called Blood Trails. And it wasn't, at least in the cowboy poetry genre, I wanted to use that word, I did genre, it wasn't very well accepted at all. People said it had no place in cowboy poetry, that we need to stick to the poems about a bull with a bugle stuck up his behind, and they didn't like it. But it got some pretty good reviews. People magazine said it was stunning and poignant. I didn't know what poignant meant. I had to look it up because I had no idea what it was. And it's been, some poems in there have been published in, well, for the last 30 years almost, in a lot of different anthologies. And I said all that to say nobody is more surprised than me. I was very surprised. And it's just been, in fact, so Pat's got a copy of the book right now. You can still buy it on Amazon. It's out of print. You can still buy it on Amazon for, I don't know, $3, something like that. And anyway, here recently, I just published another book called The Body Burning Detail, based on a poem in that book 30 years ago. And it's a memoir of my Vietnam. I was drafted in the Marines in 1968, and I sent to Vietnam, and I spent 11 months, 25 days, and 13 hours there. not that I was counting, but the book here, and I didn't write this book to make any money, and so far that part's worked out real good. But if you have any interest in it, give me your address, and I'll send you one when I get home. I've already given all of them out that I've brought with me, and you might like it. Anyway, that's my picture on the front, and I didn't ask them to put my picture on the front. That was 50 years and 100 pounds ago. And Baxter Black, the guy I mentioned first, has told me that there's one group of people worse than lawyers, and that's book publishers. And I think he's probably right, because I've been kind of disappointed. And of course, they paid, I guess they can do whatever they want since they picked up the tab. So anyway, if I could, do I have 5 minutes? Yes. I thought I'd read a short chapter from the book. And this chapter is called A Live Dog and a Dead Lion. And I put a quote before each chapter. And this particular quote is from Johnny Paycheck. And it says, "Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more." 3rd Battalion, 12th Marines, 3rd Marine Division Headquarters, September 1968. It is not the worst place one could choose to spend a war. The battalion headquarters at Quang Tri, South Vietnam, has a mess hall where the chow is semi-edible. Barracks are plywood hooches with some nearby cold water showers. At the Enlisted Men's Club, a world-class sound system pounds out Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, while listening to Procol Harum wail "A Wider Shade of Pale." It is sometimes possible to forget that you are even in Vietnam. The 15-cent beer also helps quite a bit in the rear with the gear and the beer. Not a bad life. The proverbial fly in this otherwise somewhat pleasant mix is my job. As a new guy, or FNG, an acronym that is easy to decipher, my assignment is to burn the shitters. Human waste does not burn easily. It is necessary to pull 55-gallon drums, cut in half and placed strategically beneath a 3-holer, douse the contents with diesel fuel, and set the unholy mess ablaze. The top layer burns easily enough, but what remains must be stirred like soup in a giant cauldron. The smoke and noxious smells are inescapable, saturating clothes and hair and clinging to the back of your throat. To say this task is unpleasant is perhaps the mother of all euphemisms. A story making the rounds, no doubt on the same level as an urban myth, relates how a newly arrived FNG is assigned to this particular detail. Unfortunately, someone fails in his responsibility to issue proper instructions. An inferno at the officers' facility ensues. Rather than pull the barrels out, he sets the whole building on fire. As flames leap skyward, he patiently explains that his orders were to burn the shitters. After about a week, a young private shows up one morning to be my assistant. Since I am a private first class, I take this as an opportunity to showcase my leadership potential. Apparently, this whole assignment, shitty as it is merely a test the Marines have orchestrated to determine my suitability for much bigger and better responsibilities. I resolved to become the most efficient, shit-burning private first class in the history of the Marine Corps. As fate would have it, though, my new charge knows considerably more about burning shit than I do. He is not an FNG, and this assignment is not his first shit-burning rodeo. In country for over 6 months, he initially is sent to an artillery battery on the DMZ, wounded twice, although by his own admission, not very seriously. he, he decides he has had enough. "I am not going back," he informs the first sergeant. "Do whatever you want with me." Incidentally, this seems like an act of bravery in and of itself. The first sergeant is a 30-year man who picks his teeth with a nail, and he looks like a weightlifting bulldog with a crew cut. My assistant, a young kid not long out of high school from somewhere in the Midwest, explains his reason to me thusly. "They are trying to kill me," he says. "2 chances is all they get." "Who is trying to kill you?" I ask. He looks at me like I have a foot-long penis growing out of my ear, maybe even both ears. "The Gooks," he replies. "Who do you think? The Gooks." Strangely enough, this pronouncement is a revelation. Even after boot camp, infantry, and artillery school, the idea that Gooks are trying to kill us is still surprising. By us, I mean Marines, and by extension, me. This rear area shit-burning job is looking better all the time. At the mess hall, my assistant and I have a table all to ourselves, no doubt having to do with our present occupation. We talk. My private has been busted and threatened with the brig. Even his present job is an attempt to shame him into submission. Nothing works. An appointment with a military shrink does not go well, especially when he tells the psychiatrist officer that if he felt that strongly about returning to duty, maybe he should get his own fat ass up on the DMZ. It seems somewhat of a stretch to call someone twice wounded a coward, but apparently those in position of safety have no qualms in doing so. Suspected cowardice is embarrassing to those in no danger. Later, I find those in actual combat are far more reluctant to pass judgment. Everyone, they would usually say, has a breaking point. One morning, we are half-heartedly going about our duties when my reluctant warrior splashes some diesel fuel on his legs. Too close to the flames, his clothes catch on fire. As he rolls around on the ground, we extinguish his smoldering trousers by beating them out with our hands. One leg is already starting to blister. It is not a minor burn. As he hobbles toward the battalion aid station, a bit of scripture comes to mind. A live dog is better than a dead lion. But this is not really accurate. The kid is not a dog or a lion, just a skinny 18-year-old who has seen war up close and finally decides that he has had enough. It briefly occurs to me that I have never seen him smile. I never see him again. Thank you very much.
Boy, you can't make Bill Jones up. Bill and I share something in common. We've been going to Cowboy Poetry Gathering since 1988. At the Cowboy Poetry Gathering, we trade witticisms like, don't squat with your spurs on, don't drink downstream from the herd, and quit yanking on the stump when you can plow around it. The poetry gathering started in 1985, as Bill said, and was designed in the wintertime when cowboys had nothing to do but repair gear, be in a line shack, and get ready for the snow to melt. And it is a transformation for me. 30 years now, I think it's going to be Bill and I's 31st year, whatever. And it is something to behold. It's not just a poetry gathering, it's a cultural event. Writing workshops, copyright workshops, cooking classes, the whole community is involved, elementary school kids, junior high school kids with art contests, music, and very, very much encourage you. Elko, Nevada is the daddy of all cowboy gatherings. Every year, the end of January, 1st of February in Elko, Nevada. Bruce and I share a favorite World War I poet, Wilfred Owen. Wilfred Owen was a remarkable poet and died, as Bruce mentioned, not long before the armistice was signed. He wrote a poem called The Send-Off early in 1918, which I think is, all his poems are good. If you get a chance, if you can find it, Sir Richard Burton reciting Wilfred Owen poems. I had that album on vinyl and it burned up in a fire. Probably the most powerful recitation of Wilfred Owen's poems you could ever imagine. This is The Send-Off. Down the close, darkening lanes, they sang their way to the siding shed and lined the train with faces grimly gay. Their breasts were stuck all white with wreath and spray as men's are dead. Dull porters watched them, and a casual tramp stood staring hard. Sorry to miss them from the upland camp. Then, unmoved, signals nodded, and a lamp winked to the guard. So secretly, like wrongs hushed up, they went. They were not ours. We never heard to which front they were sent. Nor there, if they yet mock what women meant who gave them flowers. Shall they return to the beating of great bells in wild trainloads? A few, too few for drums and yells, may creep back, silent, to still village wells up half-known roads, Wilfred Owen. I'm not going to do any cowboy poetry except in a couple of Rod McQuarrie's from the perspective of cowboys who come home after war. But I am going to do a poem called Spider-Man. I was in the DMZ in South Korea as a patrol leader in 1967, 1968. Commander Bucher and the Pueblo were captured in the fall of 1967, and little known to most of the American public because LBJ and McNamara didn't really want the public to know. There was a second Tet Offensive in South Korea, simultaneous with the Tet Offensive. 31 North Korean commandos were tasked to go to Seoul, assassinate Chung-hee Park, who was then the president of South Korea, as a prelude to an invasion of the South. So what happened was a lot of men who were wounded in Vietnam but didn't rotate home came to us. And we had guys from 101st Airborne, 4th Infantry Division, you name it. And we had this one guy, his name was Spider-Man. As you well know, I remember one full name of anybody that I met in the military. It was always a nickname, because I don't know why. Maybe they wouldn't be there the next day. Who knows? Well, this guy would not answer to anything but Spider-Man, and that was his personality. And I always wondered what happened to this young guy. Fingertips glue hooch wall, leg cocked in flimsy anchor, head jerks, a robotic doll, black eyes pierce disinter. Teeth flash worn white smiles, guzzles his alcoholic pen. Drowns memories reviles in torpid piss-pant oblivion. Now ancient soul of 19, past his 16-year enlistment lie, earned 3 stripes at 17, Westmoreland's Bronze Star, CIB. Third in-country tour cut short, by bungee stake trap laid. Midst Nam, Tet offensive athwart North Korean Blue House raid. Quick recoup in Tachikawa, Japan, flew to Korean demilitarized zone. Joined frozen, chosen Martian man, prowling Imjin River gravestones. In the bush, Spidey on the hunt, obsidian-faceted eyes devoid, chills your soul with a grunt. Pitiless, stalking arachnoid. His snare spins gossamer puke, hangs trophies in its web, splintered visions of gooks entombed in copper steel mesh. Ambushes any clueless prey like buff hunter on a stand. How will deadly aim parlay when all the game is canned? Nick, Nick, Spider-Man. Rod McQuarrie and Bill Jones collaborated in probably the best collaboration of Vietnam poetry that anybody can read, and I'm going to plug it again for Bill. Rod McQuarrie, I did not know Rod. He was a very close friend of Bill's, but I'd met Rod, and he was a fine young guy. He grew up in northern Nevada, cowboying, and went into the Marines. And many of us who came home in that era, we didn't get the homecoming that you do now. It was a terrible time. I remember I got drafted at 22, and I ran out of the 2S deferment, and I said, well, what am I going to do now? So Vista, the Volunteers in Service to America. Well, I got my acceptance papers from Vista the day after I got my draft notice. And there was a lot of us in that boat. And I remember going back, I was asked to come back, a guy I knew, Greg Campbell, he was a history professor. And he asked me to come in uniform and speak to his class. And I had sat in that same classroom a year or so ago. And when I walked in, half of the students turned their chairs to the wall. That messes with your mind. This is called Yellow Ribbons, Rod McQuarrie. Albuquerque, 1991, I wander out of the airport restaurant, curious, cautious. Stand by a purple pillar. Watch the noisy crowd of people grow and grow and grow. Silver foil balloons, welcome banners, eagles on t-shirts, lots of flags, yellow ribbons, everywhere. Passengers scurry through this happy mob as if embarrassed a little to clutter the path. Finally, returning warriors pierce the circle, are devoured by laughing, sobbing women, cheering, hugging men, fierce with joy. I watch all this, ashamed for my selfish thoughts. This is now, the past is gone, forever. Slowly, the happy mob moves left toward the escalator to get to the parties, parades, vacations, lives. Mine's accepting it's over. No one seems to see the quiet cowboy standing by the purple pillar, holding his hat in his hand. This is another poem of Rod's. And I think Rod wrote this after he was able to reconcile a lot of things. You never reconcile them all. It's kind of like a cancer cell. It's always there, and it goes into remission. And then sometimes it comes back, and sometimes it multiplies faster than you want it. If you can control it, if you can sublimate it, yeah, you might be okay. And this is called For Life. If life were just one April day, and I should wake mid-afternoon to feel the sunshine on my shirt, warm scattered raindrops wet my cheek, I'd marvel with newborn eyes at the beauty I had never seen. If life should be one April day, I'll not pine for a morning lost, nor mourn some teenage innocence. But hand in hand, my love and I will lift one cup for fallen friends. Excuse me. Then, our business done, we'll laugh till wrinkles frame our eyes. And in these final precious hours, we'll celebrate the evening time. Rod McQuarrie, thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I am the only one on the stage that is not a veteran, and the honor of being up here is more than I can really say. We're short on time, so I'm going to ask Patrick to do a poem he wanted to do. He sent us all some books from his collection. He supported this whole thing from the very beginning. He sent me an email and he said, I pray that the World War I poem session will end with the poem Aftermath, with the Aftermath poem. I told him that I was not qualified or authorized to grant prayers, but I'd do what I could. And on his way back from Ireland, he said he memorized the poem, and Patrick, would you do that? And I'll end this with, the reason I'm last is I'm famous for short poems. I got a whole lot of real short poems that go fast, and I collect them, poems like The Ode to the Jumper Cables, Red's Hot, Black Snot. And somebody said, that's way too long a poem. I said, I know a shorter one. It's called The Ode to the Flea, Adam had him. And I thought, that'll do it. And then somebody said, that's too long a poem, it's got too many words. The Ode to the Miniature Horse. Why? Patrick?
For those who work with veterans, I could not recommend this book more. And there's particularly a poem in there called The White Wall. Probably figure out what it's about. But they're fairly easy to get. I recommended I sent 3 or 4 books with maybe 200 yellow stickies stuck all through there that probably program about an 8-hour poetry session on just World War I poetry, starting at the beginning, of course, with Brooke and the soldier, and ending with this poem by Siegfried Sassoon. Wilfred Owen was such a good poet. We got to spend months, Craig Lockhart, he got to spend months in Craig Lockhart with Siegfried Sassoon, who was quite a hero up until 1917 when he wrote a letter to Parliament saying that he thought that the war was a desperate crime and that too many young men were being killed for very little. So he was a war protester far earlier than many of my friends. Anyway, do I have it memorized? Pretty close, but not exactly. So this is called Aftermath. It was written in March 1919, just as the peace conference was starting. Everybody was talking about the armistice, great things going on, all these great world leaders getting together, talking about the future of the world, and he thought
people were being forgotten. Have you forgotten yet? The world's events have rumbled on since those gag days like traffic checked at the crossing of city ways. And the haunted gap in your mind is filled with thoughts that flow like clouds in the lit heavens of life. And you're a man reprieved to go, taking your peaceful share of time with joy to spare. But the past is still the same, and war is a bloody game. Have you forgotten yet? Swear by the slain of the war, you will never forget. Do you remember the dark months in the sector before Mametz? The nights you watched and wired and dug and piled sandbags on parapets? Do you remember the rats and the stench of the corpses in front of the frontline trench? Dawn coming, dirty white and chill. Merciless rain. Did you ever stop to ask, will it ever happen again? Do you remember the din before the attack? The anger, the blind compassion that seized and shook you as you looked into the doomed and haggard faces of your men? Do you remember the stretcher cases lurching back with dying eyes and lolling heads, and the gray, ashen mask of the lads who were once keen, kind, and gay? Have you forgotten yet? Look up, and by the green of this spring, swear that you'll never forget. Aftermath, Siegfried Sassoon. I just want to say, all those people here have answered his question.
Now I'll prove that I can do short poems. When the cowboy poetry thing is like, it covers a lot of other things about poetry. It's really work poetry, it's life poetry, it's occupational poetry. Sailors do it, soldiers do it, cowboys do it, sheepherders do it, loggers do it, miners do it, and it's been going on since, I think, the beginning of time. I never was really a cowboy. I was a ranch hand. My granddad was a cowboy. And I'd moved to ranches all over the country and work there for a little while and go to another one. And I got to thinking about how difficult that was for my wife. Little family moved way in the middle of nowhere, living in an adobe house someplace. And so I decided I would apologize to her. This poem is called The Apology. And for some odd reason, I got in a lot of trouble for not getting my rhymes at the end of the lines like they're supposed to. And this poem came that way. It's called The Apology. Did you ever step across a horse in the chill before the dawn and leave a woman wondering how long you would be gone? She'd know you were home when she heard you at the door. You'd not even say what pasture you were headed for. Gave no thought that she might worry when you stayed out way late. Maybe stay awake and listen, trying to hear you at the gate. That she might think you hurt from a cow wreck or a fall and wonder where to look or which neighbor she should call. You're gray as granite now, no careless cowboy anymore, and decide to ask forgiveness for all the worry you caused her. But through her puzzled laugh, you hear her say, I slept right through the goofy things you do, because when we were 20, I was immortal, just like you. The other very short poem, and I'll end with this one, it's called The Barn Cats. When When we first started doing the cowboy poetry gatherings, people would come up to me, obviously successful, professional people. What they wanted to talk about was the time they spent on their uncle's ranch in Wyoming, or the time they spent on their granddad's farm. And they'd go on and on and on about this business, what it was. And our friend Dave Stamey made an observation. He said there's a lot of doctors and lawyers that will dress up like cowboys, but there's hardly any cowboys that dress up like doctors and lawyers. This is called the Barn Cats. It's funny the things you remember, like accepting without question that it was your solemn duty to study hard and earn big money because parents suffered the Depression. How on your 10th birthday you walked down to a milk with a staggering headache, sat on the one-legged stool, and pressed your head against her silken flank. How you remember dull ringing sounds as the first squirts hit bottom. How the sound changed to a quiet hiss as foaming milk filled the shiny bucket. How the smell of fresh, warm milk rose to mingle with the clean cow smell. How the barn cats sat half-circled, mewing politely, insisting there was enough to fill their little pan. How the gentle cow responded to strong brown hands and let down her milk. How calmness and forbearance were transmitted through your skull. How your pain was drawn into the patient cow. And now, years later, you look out a city window and wonder if big money is really better than barn cats and cow curd headaches.
How about another round of applause, please? Come on. So we're very short on time, and we do have a movie that's screening that Monica may have mentioned this morning, so I want to make sure that everyone has enough ample time to get across the street. So just by way of closing, instead of a conversation, because you covered so much, you just didn't know it here. You covered it all for me. I want to ask if one of you wouldn't mind closing us out. And here we are. You all were here at the panel earlier this morning. You heard a lot what was covered. We shared lunch together. I want to know if there's one thing you want to share with our audiences here or right before Veterans Day. Is there something that we've missed? Is there something that you feel needs to be said to our audiences here? Vess?
I don't know. I'm pretty delighted with what's happening now. And the connection between, we used the cowboy poetry gathering because it was like a man bites dog thing. They advertised it, and people thought, cowboys, what the hell? Poems? This doesn't make any sense at all. And so the folklorists that gathered the first of us together to recite the old-time poems because they thought we were getting kind of old and we were all going to die and they'd be gone. They didn't know we were still writing them. And so when we got involved in this whole thing, all of a sudden here was this opportunity with these huge crowds of people coming. Thousands of people came to listen to poetry. Stay the whole week in Elko and go from session to session to session to session and spend money on the night shows to hear this stuff. And we're sitting there thinking, we wrote this to do to our cow dogs and our saddle horses, we didn't do to people. So when I first got the body burning detail from Bill Jones and then later got Corbeau from Rod McQuarrie, we thought, there's all these people here. Why not add these other poems in? And it worked. So I would say that there's got to be a way to get people to come listen. And I don't know if we can come up with another man bites dog story, but some way we ought to be able to get some. make it fun. It's like, I remember one of the poets, I think it was William Carlos Williams, said if it ain't a pleasure, it ain't a poem. But in the writing that we do, if there isn't a story, academics seem to think that form and message should war with one another and neither should win. That's not us. It starts with the story and it ends with
Yeah, that's so much what we think of in the Poetry and Literature Center when we think of poetry and commonality. I like to think of it as story anyway. And who doesn't like story hour? Who can't relate to story hour? So I'm afraid we have to shut it down, as sad as I am. So please give our guests another round of applause.